On April 7, 2024, 18.9 million people sat down to watch a women's college basketball game. Not as a casual background event, not because there was nothing else on. They sat down, they tuned in, and they stayed, all the way to the final buzzer, where viewership peaked at 24.1 million people in the closing minutes. That game, Iowa versus South Carolina, became the most watched women's college basketball game in the history of American television. It was also the first women's NCAA championship to outdraw the men's title game. Not just in a down year for the men. For the first time in history, viewership was up 90% from the year before and 288% from 2 years prior. This moment did not come out of nowhere. Behind those 18.9 million viewers are 5 decades of women fighting to be taken seriously. 5 decades of proving, one argument at a time, that women's sports were worth the airtime, the investment, and the front page. Every decade, women's sports needed a new proof point, a new argument that women were worth the investment, the airtime, the respect. Title IX wrote it into law. Billie Jean King proved it on television. Brandi Chastain made it undeniable in front of 90,000 people. Megan Rapinoe made it legal, and Caitlin Clark made it the biggest show in basketball. This is the story of those 5 moments, and why each one made the next one possible. If you want to understand how we got here, stay until the end. These are not just sports stories. They are the architecture of something that took 50 years to build. Let's go back to the beginning. June 23, 1972. Before this date, fewer than 30,000 women competed in college sports in the United States. Women received 2% of college athletic budgets. Athletic scholarships for women were practically non-existent. If you were a girl who was serious about competing at the highest level, the institutions that were supposed to support you simply did not see that as their responsibility. Sports were, in the most formal institutional sense, not designed for women. Then Congress passed 37 words. That is the actual length of the operative clause of Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. 37 words that banned sex discrimination in any educational institution receiving federal funding. The law did not specifically mention sports. It did not have to. If federal money was involved, women had the same legal right to participate as men. Every college, every university, every school district that took federal dollars, and almost all of them did, was now legally required to treat female students the same as male students when it came to athletic opportunity. Schools did not simply embrace this. Programs fought it. Athletic directors lobbied against it. Entire organizations spent years in court trying to narrow the scope of what Title IX actually required. But the law held, and over the following decades, the numbers moved dramatically. By the time of Title IX's 40th anniversary in 2012, according to the Women's Sports Foundation, girls' high school sports participation had increased by more than 1,000%. Today, women make up 44% of all NCAA athletes, up from just 15% before 1972. Title IX did not create the players, but it created the legal right to become one. It built the pipeline. And once the pipeline existed, the question became whether anyone outside of women themselves believed the product was worth watching. Enter Bobby Riggs. September 20th, 1973, Houston Astrodome. Bobby Riggs was a 55-year-old former Wimbledon champion and self-described chauvinist who had spent months running a very public campaign to prove that no woman in tennis could beat him. He was not quiet about it. He gave interviews, made speeches, and backed up his words by defeating Australian star Margaret Court in a match earlier that year. Now he was scheduled to face Billie Jean King, the world's top-ranked women's tennis player and the most visible advocate for women's sports in America. Riggs understood theater. He arrived at the Astrodome in a golden carriage pulled by women dressed as Greek goddesses. King, not one to be outdone, was carried in on a velvet litter by shirtless men dressed as ancient warriors. The spectacle was deliberate. But what happened on the court was not theater. 30,472 fans packed into the Astrodome. Approximately 90 million people around the world watched on television. And Billie Jean King won 6-4, 6-3, 6-3, 3 straight sets. This was not a close match that broke down to a final game or a lucky moment. It was a systematic dismantling. Riggs did not win a single set. After the final point, he walked to the net and King leaped over it to shake his hand. 90 million people watched a woman dismantle in front of a live audience and a global broadcast the argument that women could not compete at the highest level. Corporate sponsors noticed. Participation in women's tennis, running, and recreational sports exploded in the years that followed. The law had created the right to play. Billie Jean King proved in front of 90 million witnesses that people would watch. But the next moment proved something even more powerful. It proved that people would not just watch, they would feel it. July 10, 1999, Rose Bowl, Pasadena, California. The United States women's national soccer team had just played 120 minutes of scoreless soccer against China in the Women's World Cup final. The Rose Bowl held 90,185 people that day, a world record for a women's sporting event at the time. Every seat was filled. The match went to a penalty shootout. 5 kicks each. The shootout was tied at 4 goals apiece when Brandi Chastain stepped up to take the final shot for the United States. She hit it, left foot, low and hard to the left corner. The Chinese goalkeeper went the wrong way. The United States won the World Cup 5-4. And then Chastain did something that nobody in the stadium, nobody watching at home, and nobody in the media had anticipated. She ripped off her jersey, fell to her knees on the Rose Bowl grass, and pumped both fists at the California sky, revealing her black Nike sports bra to 90,000 fans in the stadium and 40 million American television viewers watching at home. The New York Times would later call that image the most iconic photograph ever taken of a female athlete. The photograph appeared simultaneously on the covers of Sports Illustrated, Time, and Newsweek, 3 of the largest magazines in America, in the same week. The tournament itself had averaged 37,319 fans per match across every venue in the country. The final drew 40 million viewers. Women's sports was not a niche interest. It was not a charity broadcast. It was a television event. Women's sports could sell. That was no longer a hypothesis. It was a magazine cover, 3 of them at the same time. But magazine covers and sold-out stadiums did not automatically translate into equal pay. That battle would take another 2 decades and a federal lawsuit to resolve. February 22nd, 2022. The U.S. women's national soccer team reached a settlement with U.S. Soccer in their equal pay lawsuit. $24 million total, $22 million distributed directly to the players, $2 million directed into a post-career fund. And critically, going forward, equal pay rates for all friendlies and all tournaments, including the World Cup. This was the resolution of a 6-year legal fight. In 2016, Megan Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, Carly Lloyd, Rebecca Sauerbrunn, and Hope Solo had filed a formal gender discrimination claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They were suing the very federation that employed them, U.S. Soccer, for paying the women's team significantly less than the men's team, despite the fact that the women had won more trophies, generated more revenue in multiple years, and performed at a demonstrably higher level on the world stage than the men's team had. The case did not move in a straight line. The women lost their initial equal pay lawsuit in 2020 when a federal judge ruled against them on the specific compensation structure argument. They could have stopped there. They chose to appeal. They kept fighting. And 6 years after that first EEOC filing, the settlement came, with legally binding equal pay protections written directly into the agreement. Not a gentleman's agreement, not a press release, a contract. Megan Rapinoe, after the settlement was announced, said this: "The only justice now is ensuring that this never happens again." Title IX created the legal right to compete. Billie Jean King proved 90 million people would watch. Brandi Chastain proved the sport could fill stadiums and move magazines off shelves. Rapinoe and her teammates proved that when the legal system was pushed far enough, it would protect what women had spent decades building. And then came Caitlin Clark. April 7th, 2024, Iowa versus South Carolina, the women's NCAA championship game. Clark had been the most watched player in college basketball, men's or women's, for the entire 2023-2024 season. She broke the all-time NCAA scoring record. She drew sellout crowds to road games. She became the story that sports media could not stop covering. And on April 7th, everything that built toward her converged into one number: 18.9 million viewers. By the final minutes of the championship game, that number peaked at 24.1 million people, watching simultaneously on television, on phones, on laptops. South Carolina won. Clark's team lost. But the outcome was almost beside the point in terms of what that evening meant for women's sports. Because what happened on April 7th, 2024 was not primarily about who won the championship. It was about what 18.9 million people watching a women's basketball game communicates to every network executive, every sponsor, every league commissioner who had spent decades treating women's sports as a secondary investment. The women's game was not competing with the men's game anymore. In 2024, it was beating it. Later that spring, the 2024 WNBA draft drew 2.45 million viewers, the most watched WNBA telecast since 2000. The money began to follow. The conversation had permanently shifted. Here is what I want you to hold in your mind. Title IX gave girls the legal right to compete in 1972. Billie Jean King made 90 million people watch in 1973. Brandi Chastain put women's sports on 3 magazine covers at the same time in 1999. Megan Rapinoe made equal pay a legal, contractual reality in 2022. And in 2024, Caitlin Clark drew the largest audience women's basketball had ever seen in the history of the sport. Each of those moments was necessary. Remove any single one, and the next one does not happen. Title IX built the athletes. King built the audience. Chastain built the cultural proof point. Rapinoe built the legal framework. Clark built the ratings record that changed the conversation in every boardroom and broadcast deal in professional women's sports. The pipeline is real. It has been under construction for 50 years, and if the pattern holds, and every piece of evidence suggests it will, then what comes after 18.9 million is something we have not seen yet. The only question is which moment it will be and who will be standing in the middle of it. If this story matters to you, click on the video on your screen right now. There is more where this came from. And if you are new here, subscribe, because we are just getting started on what women's sports actually built.